Now we'll hear from David Layzell. So David, if you want to share your screen and put your slides up.
Thanks, Maggie. That's great. Thanks, Nick. I will share my screen here. What I'd like to do is follow on from some of the discussion that Maggie and introduction that Maggie provided and talk a bit about how to build a fuel hydrogen economy and the importance then that we see of hydrogen hubs. So to put this in perspective, let's as Maggie mentioned before, we already have a pretty significant hydrogen production in Canada today. It works out to about 8,200 tons of hydrogen every day. The hydrogen, virtually all of it is made from fossil fuels, mostly methane, natural gas. And in making that hydrogen, carbon dioxide is released to the atmosphere. This is called gray hydrogen. That hydrogen is used to make industrial feedstocks, fertilizers for agriculture, especially ammonia, and as well as fuels for transportation and other chemicals and materials. And if fuels for transportation, hydrogen is used to crack bitumen into synthetic crude oil, but also convert all kinds of crude oil into gasoline and diesel fuel. In a new net zero energy system, we are looking at fossil fuels and biomass. Kathleen, you got your sound on. The CO2 would be, of course, produced, but we need to capture that CO2 and sequester it. And that's called blue hydrogen. So essentially it's similar to this process, but we're not releasing the CO2 to the atmosphere. And if you use it from a biomass source, you can actually get negative carbon emissions from that process. As Maggie said, you can also make green hydrogen from renewables or nuclear, and that's sometimes called pink and other colors, but we're called electrolysis based. And you can also get hydrogen. We're going to hear from from chlor-alkali plants where hydrogen's a byproduct. In all ways, these have much lower or no carbon emissions than the gray hydrogen, and it can be used not only as an industrial feedstock, but the goal is to provide this hydrogen for export to other jurisdictions, overseas as well as the United States, or provide it as a fuel for supporting transportation, building, heating, industry, and even power generation within Canada. And it was power generation, so you could actually hydrogen become a form of a long-term energy storage, electricity storage, because you can use electricity to make hydrogen and then use hydrogen to make electricity again. Now, the good news is that Canada has a real competitive advantage in this space. Canada's this is a Japanese study from about 2.5 years ago, where they've looked at all the countries on the Pacific Rim countries and identified Canada, the ones in yellow on here, as one of the lowest places in the world to make blue hydrogen that's made from natural gas. And certainly of all of the countries they looked at, the lowest cost in the world for making green hydrogen. But what you'll notice here is that blue hydrogen today tends to be less expensive to make than green hydrogen. And indeed in Alberta and in Western Canada, blue hydrogen is about half the wholesale cost of diesel and about 1/3 the retail cost. So that opens up a really interesting opportunity for trying to grow a hydrogen economy with those kinds of feedstocks. But the challenge with hydrogen is that it's a gas. It's really, we could make it quite inexpensive, lower than the cost of diesel, but it's more expensive to move and store around than liquids. And the other thing is the economic improves though with scale. So as you start moving more hydrogen around and having greater use of hydrogen, the actual cost comes down quite dramatically. So our analysis here is we really have to go big or go home. We have to get to the scale quickly. So what we are arguing is we need to focus on hydrogen hubs, places where we have low cost hydrogen production, substantial nearby market demand, and a cost-effective connection between the supply and the demand. The one that's most obvious is pipelines, especially if we can get to scale where pipelines make sense. And we need engaged industry, governments, and academics working together to put this new value chain in place. We've been looking at where to do this across Canada. One of the areas we see as a significant opportunity is in Alberta, around areas where we already have large-scale industrial blue hydrogen production. And this is where includes with the cost of CO2 capture, is that we can make hydrogen at about $1.50 a kilogram. And we can then piggyback on that kind of industrial infrastructure, pull a pipeline off, and provide the hydrogen to buses and trucks, to trains, for transportation, space heating for homes or commercial buildings, and even possibly for power generation. And this pipeline, the same infrastructure, could be used to bring green hydrogen to market as well, if the pipeline goes through a region where we have good green hydrogen production. The idea is to have pipelines connect to new markets, rapidly grow these demands for this hydrogen, and also attract an opportunity to attract internationally hydrogen using industries and original equipment manufacturers that are interested in benefiting and growing their business through hydrogen supply and demand for that hydrogen. Within Alberta, one of the most promising areas is right near Edmonton, and we call the Greater Edmonton Hydrogen Hub. And it already has a hydrogen pipeline that's shown here. Maggie talked a bit. It has the Quest CO2 line is up here, and it has a Alberta Carbon trunk line for enhanced oil recovery here. So two pipelines that carry away the byproduct, the CO2 that is you create when you make blue hydrogen, and a number of companies that are actually would be using that hydrogen. And in fact, three of the companies already now are producing a blue hydrogen and putting the CO2 in the pipeline. So what we see here is the opportunity to find markets, potential market sizes. And I'll give you an example here. This is the end of the hydrogen pipeline. This is the city of Edmonton and its ring road. What we have is the red dots are the major private trucking fleets. These are the big commercial trucking fleets. And the little gas pumps there are existing diesel fuel stations for fueling those large trucking fleets. We also have here municipal fueling for buses, the fueling stations for municipal buses, for garbage trucks in this area. These are, snow plows and gravel trucks, etc., that the city owns, and the city of Edmonton is quite interested in converting a significant proportion of their fleet to hydrogen over the next few years. And then we also have here injection ports where high pressure natural gas pipelines are dropped to lower pressure for distribution for residential and commercial heating throughout the city. And so these are the points where we could inject hydrogen in and mix hydrogen in, as is already being done in Fort Saskatchewan, the possibilities to do it in Edmonton as well. So we've estimated in the work we've been doing is that there's a potential in the whole area for transportation demand of about 670 tons of hydrogen a day. This is just in the Edmonton region. There's potential for space heat in the 1,500 tons a day, and that would be, of course, higher in the winter than in the summer, and potential for export in many thousands of tons per day. And the important thing to note is that virtually all of the demand for these occurs on two main corridors, both anchored in where we can produce low-cost blue hydrogen. One is a corridor that comes diagonally through Edmonton and heads down towards the airport, another one across the top of the city. So the conclusion here is that hydrogen hubs are needed in order to get to scale and to build a resilient new hydrogen energy system, an energy system where the production of we can get to a sufficient scale of production to keep the price low, and we can get to a significant scale of demand in order to be able to have a cost-effective linkage of pipelines typically, but not absolutely necessarily, that would link the supply to demand. And these should be deployed at strategic locations across Canada. Edmonton is one location where we see opportunities, certainly Prince George, we're going to hear about some exciting opportunities there. Sarnia, Ontario, there's places in Quebec, there's places in Eastern Canada, a number of other places, I would say in British Columbia and in Alberta, that we could actually build significant demand centers around. And then we need to grow these demand centers and interconnect them to serve other communities. And we see this as a key part of the strategy, the pathway to a net zero future. Thank you.
All right, David, we'll start off with some questions. I think the first question is about hydrogen embrittlement and a problem for pipelines. Can you speak to that?
Sure, the hydrogen embrittlement is a problem for pipelines, especially if it's a carbon steel, high carbon steel, because the hydrogen gets into the steel and starts pulling the carbon molecules out and causes embrittlement. There's a 50 kilometer long pipeline in Edmonton now. It was the red line on my charts. That is a steel pipeline. And it's basically 98%, 99% hydrogen. So steel works fine for hydrogen as long as you got the right kind of steel. Where there is a lot of interest now in taking existing natural gas pipeline infrastructure and repurposing it, especially if it's abandoned infrastructure, repurposing it for hydrogen. There are some companies that are looking putting plastic liners down the pipeline that would use the pipeline corridor and basically get a second life out of that of other infrastructure. And there's even a possibility of putting sort of a pig down the line and spraying on a chemical or basically a sealant that would keep the hydrogen away from the steel. There's a lot of work being done on the whole issue of how do you take some existing infrastructure we have today and over the next 30 years move it to infrastructure that would support a hydrogen economy. Second question, what's holding this up? What the biggest thing is that we are really trying here to create a new energy system. And I think the problem in hydrogen in the past has been we've had a vicious cycle. We don't have any hydrogen infrastructure because we don't have any vehicles, and we don't have any vehicles because we don't have the infrastructure. And so the idea that we've been working on is where are the opportunities in Canada where we can break that vicious cycle and create a virtuous cycle where, and we would argue it's around places that already have significant hydrogen production, where we already have either blue hydrogen production or hydrogen production, the gray that could be made blue and sequestered, or really extra electricity that could be used to make green hydrogen. Or another exciting opportunity is places where we actually are already producing significant amount of byproduct hydrogen, and it could be tapped off and used to support hydrogen economy. So, and then build, so we can then break that and then build demand around those locations to try to build out around nodes or hubs across Canada, really significant hydrogen demand.
Thank you, David.